Two Dudes, One Barbell. This is episode 6.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think so.
6.
It's been 6. That's pretty
Yeah,
awesome.
right? And today we're talking about the big rocks of training and nutrition, and we're going to talk about specifically training principles today. We're going to be covering all the main focal points, which are specificity, overload, progression, recovery, reversibility. We've got a really cool study to look at with reversibility and individualization.
Yeah, and it's sort of an extension of when I asked the question, what 4 exercises would you do to get the most bang for your buck?
Yeah. So a few episodes back, we had that conversation about what I would pick specifically for bodybuilding, what we talked about specifically more so for general training, function and whatnot.
And these principles are going to allow for what sort of variables you sort of add to those particular movements to see developments in certain areas. And we talked about particular areas, I don't know which episode that was, where we talked about the health-related components of fitness and the skill-related components of fitness.
That was the feedback, but yeah.
Yeah,
so these are the principles that apply to, yes, you go in the gym and do a squat or a front squat.
And then how you do that squat.
And then what you do next week and what you do going forward from there, from days, weeks, years, etc.
And I think this is where most people get tripped up, and generally people will just go to the gym, they might see everyone doing particular movements, and then they keep doing those movements, and we've all seen the middle-aged person that goes to the gym, does the same weights, does the same routine, and I don't know how long they've been doing it, but they don't look different.
Oh, it's years.
Yeah, it's in some cases maybe decades, and so there has been no application of the principles at all.
So no progress. Someone that comes in does the same weight on the same machine, and it's better than nothing, but it's not gonna get them any progress.
Yeah, and I think most people want to go somewhere, right?
Yeah,
and we talk about goal setting.
And the problem is the sad thing is they probably think they're doing the right thing in order to progress, but without any objective sort of tracking and measuring and plan in place, it's very hard for them to realize they're not.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean that's so true, right? If you don't record it, right, and this is why goal setting is so useful. If you don't record it,
you don't know.
You don't really know. Yeah.
And that goes with the hard thing with being a coach as well. If your clients aren't recording their progress and you're only seeing them once a week and you're missing out on 3 of their workouts and they're like, I think I'm getting stronger. It's like, has the weight progressed? Oh, do you write it down anywhere? It's up here.
Yeah. Oh, you get that with young trainees too, a lot. They're like, going to the gym. It's like, so you have a plan written down, and then they're like, no, it's all up here. I'm like, so you track your numbers in here? Yeah, I know exactly what I've done. I'm like, sure, mate.
Most of them can't remember what they had for breakfast the day before, but they remember their training plan to a T.
Yeah, they know what every set was like and how many reps they did, and
Anyway, so that's why applying these principles is so important, and if you can, maximizing them. And so we'll start with specificity. Do you want to explain what specificity is?
So specificity is the principle of training what you want to improve, right? So in the area and the exact movement pattern, the angles in which you want
to get the adaptation that you want. Yeah. If you want bigger legs, a bench press isn't going to get you bigger legs.
No, definitely not. Some people might think that's the case. It's like, did you hear any of the old school bodybuilders say that you do heavy squats before arms so you have more surge of testosterone?
Yeah, or more growth hormone or something like that.
Yeah. Squats gets the hormones pumping, and then you're gonna get bigger arms because of it.
I've absolutely heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, largely the specificity rule doesn't really take that into consideration at all. If you want bigger arms, you probably need to do arm movements.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, it goes a bit further than that if we want to go down the specificity rabbit hole. And I think we'll use the back squat as an example, because the back squat is a complex movement where we use multiple joints. And you would think, well, if we talk about a back squat, what do you think of? What do you think's loaded? When I ask you, you're going to know the answer, but what would people usually say? What are the back squat loads?
The legs.
The legs, right? Back squat is a leg movement, but what really is it?
Full body.
Full body. And with a back squat, if you want it to improve, sometimes squats alone are not going to be enough. Or like just your conventional back squat with a conventional tempo.
Yeah.
So thinking about the back squat specifically, right, specificity for training for the back squat may include back training, because that is your specific weakness which you need to address to improve your squat.
Oh, yeah.
So specificity doesn't just mean, oh, I'm training for my back squat because I want to get a 1RM in my powerlifting meet. It means, specificity means, I'm weak here, so I need to develop that in order to get better at
towards reaching the overall goal. So you're not just going to do squats to get better at squats. You like doing something that strengthens your back also helps you get better at squats, and that's specificity in your program.
That's still specificity.
Yeah.
So of course squats are necessary for developing a squat. Now there's going to be arguments and there's going to be anecdotes of people who have developed a bigger squat from doing all sorts of other stuff, and we're not going to delve into it. That's going to be something else.
Too far off the road.
Yeah. And that might be because they're addressing specific weaknesses, right? So they're probably still training in the specificity principle, but typically it will be training weaknesses and training the particular movements that you want to improve.
Yeah. And specificity is very case dependent.
Most definitely.
Yeah, which is huge. Is where when it comes to coaching someone, there's no black and white, do this and you'll get results. You've got to sort of see how they move, see if they need that extra stuff with their program.
Yeah, and that taps into the last principle that we talk about, which is individualization, whereas some people's levers and stuff are different, and we'll kind of tap into that a bit later.
All right, we'll get that last.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to address one more thing, probably more towards the hypertrophy side of things, and that's understanding that in terms of stimulating a muscle, you need to know where the power curve is in order to stimulate it maximally.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I love the conversations around power curves and stuff like that. It's only something I got into in the last maybe 2 or 3 years, picking specific exercises that suit the power curve of like a muscle far better than other ones to get the most. Because when it comes to hypertrophy and building muscle, you just want muscular tension applied at the most optimal. Yeah, so like.
Well, is it a particular range, or do you want to apply tension through the whole range of motion? Like as a bodybuilder?
I'd say the whole range of motion. Like you hear a lot, I don't know, it's hard to tell because there's arguments from both sides. Like a lot of people reckon that most of the growth is going to happen like mid-range of a muscle's range of movement. And then obviously like Mike Israetel and those guys in the full ROM team.
Yeah.
Love the full range of movement.
There's definitely a big argument for full range of motion, but there's also some specific, maybe I'll pull up some of those studies in the future where if you train a particular range, that particular range gains hypertrophy. It's the old bro science approach that actually got proven true.
So training in a specific part of the movement to make that specific part of the muscle bigger, yeah?
So we'll delve into that another time, but like typically we're looking for full range and a particular power curve to make sure it's maximal stimulation.
For all muscle fibers, and that's the idea. Is like the full range of motion gives activation to the full range of muscle fibers. Whereas if you're just doing bicep curls here to here, you're only going to hit those mid-range ones.
Yeah.
Rather than going all the way down, you'll stretch and you'll get sort of.
Yeah, that's a good example for the bicep, but I think maybe we flip back to the squat, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Is the squat actually a good movement for developing your legs?
Like. Yes and no.
Okay. What's the pros and what's the cons? From a bodybuilding standpoint.
Oh.
That's what I mean. Like the squat is
injury mitigation. And I do this with like clients as well. I explain this to clients a lot. It's like if you want a good squat, you got to squat. Yes. If you want big legs, a leg press is safer, and I can push you until you nearly shit yourself. And that's going to get you more muscle mass. If I do that on a back squat, odds are your back's going to fire out first. You're going to lose tension in your back. You're going to drop the squat. It's a lot more taxing, mentally as well, to get to max effort squats. Yeah. It's just not something a lot of people can do, or let alone should do.
Yeah, and can you do like fail sets on a squat with eccentrics? You could.
But Jesus, like that's the whole other level. Yeah, and like even like a back squat, like I don't think I've ever seen anyone really do it. You might get Tom Platz or something like that doing max effort back squats, but like
Did you see my one? No.
I didn't see your one, but I think I heard about it. How many did you get?
Okay, I did 120 for 20 reps, and then I started pausing because I wanted to go to failure.
Yeah.
Because of my cardio was like killing me, and I got two more pause reps, so 22 at 120.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you max out? Like, did you have to drop
I
off
couldn't.
the back?
I had to bail.
You couldn't come back up. Okay, yeah. So.
And I was crawling for like 3 minutes.
Yeah, no, I don't doubt that for a second.
Yeah.
But yes, you're also a very trained individual. You squat a lot.
Yeah.
Like you squat a lot.
It's probably arguably too much.
Yeah. But if you get like a Susan walking off the street and she just wants to build more muscle mass, like you couldn't convince them to go to failure squats, and they probably couldn't get there.
And they probably shouldn't.
And they probably shouldn't, no.
Yeah.
Because the odds of them blowing their back out or something like.
And the reason for that is with a squat, the actual loading is distributed through multiple joints, right? And if you wanted to maximize the actual stimulation to a particular muscle, let's say quads, for example, right? Because when people think legs, they think quads.
Yeah.
You want your knee to go through full range of motion, knee flexion, but then you want all the tension to be on the quads through that range of motion.
Yeah.
In a squat, when we hit like below parallel, all these other muscles start being incorporated into the muscle, and you also have to hold your back position.
Yeah.
So adductors, glutes start firing, and then
And so it's no longer just a quad exercise.
Yeah.
And it never was really to start with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you want maximal just quads and you want to get like the biggest legs you can, then you're better off finding a machine or something that's gonna just do knee flexion and push it to the hardest you can. So like leg extensions or like the incline hack squat, but even that's like still something I get mad at adductor pump.
Incline hack squat, yeah. What would be an adaptation if they didn't have machines? I've got some ideas around that actually.
Yeah, what you could do in the gym if.
Yeah, you could do. I mean, of course, you can do sissy squats, right? So sissy squats have pretty good knee flexion.
How many people do you see doing sissy squats?
Zero.
Absolutely
no one. But they're probably a pretty good movement for developing quads.
I've done them a couple times in the past. Like I've had them in my programs every now and again. Like in high school, I did. I think after reading like Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding.
Did he do sissy squats? He must have.
I think they were in the book, and I saw it in the book, and So.
We should try and find a video of Arnie doing sissy squats at some point.
Yeah.
That would be pretty funny. Work the muscle. Yeah. Should we move on to the next thing?
I think so, or we're not going to get through them. Alright, so the second, so we've got specificity. So training what you need to train for that specific goal, and then we have overload.
Yep. So what's overload?
What is overload? Do you want to explain what overload is?
I can do that, yeah. So overload is putting more stimulus on the system than is previously required. So for you or for me, like right now, if we had never walked, going for a walk would be overload.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, and it scales obviously quite a lot, and it also depends on the system that's being trained, right? So if you got me to go for a 1K run,
that's the overload for you?
That's definitely overload for me, because the last time I ran, I don't actually know.
Yeah, okay. But for a marathon runner, that's nothing.
That is not overload,
be
because it's
he
not.
Can do it.
Yeah.
He's trained up to that point. It's the same as like you squatting 180 kilos. You have to do 105 next week.
Yeah, so if I do 105 for 3, that's probably not overload.
But if you get someone fresh in the gym, the bar could be overload.
Exactly.
Yeah,
most
it would
definitely.
be. Yeah.
So that's where the individualization, the specificity of the individual comes into it.
I feel like it's threaded into all of these things.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we need to address all of them. And I got a bit too carried away with the specificity.
Yeah. So overload just means, to quote what Greg Doucette, train harder than last time.
Yeah. Okay.
Essentially.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, good old Greg.
Yeah, good old Greg. So,
yeah, and that's sort of like a good mantra for applying progressive overload, right? Because train more than last time has a time frame. So that means that you train this much this week, you train a little bit more the week after, and you train a little bit more the week after that. And so often people don't put overload and progression separate. They usually call it progressive overload.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll hear people say, oh yeah, I'm applying progressive overload. Blah, 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 blah.
That's everywhere, and like knowing the difference between overload and progressive overload, or whatever you want to call it. So would you say progression is just progressive overload?
Progression is...
Or it's you're programming towards a goal, which doesn't necessarily always need overload progression. It can have a deload week is still progression in form? Or?
Yeah, so progressive overload is applying overload over a progressive period.
Yep.
And then we can say progression is like maybe even just periodization, the long-term plan.
Yeah.
Right?
And so it's just tracking progress and getting better over time.
Of course, overload is part of that,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's all about getting better and applying.
Overload is just a way to apply
the stimulus, whether it be more reps, more weight. We just talked about weight, but you could do more reps. You could do less rest period.
Like a better tempo, more control, something like that. All that stuff still applies.
Slower, faster.
Yeah.
Both overload, yeah. So, but progression, of course, is just more reps over a period of time, or more weight over a period of time.
Making sure you are actually moving forward.
Yeah, so what does that look like? Okay. Lot of the time people are like, I'm going to max out today, right? And next week, I'm going to beat it.
Kind of guilty.
All right. So what if you don't beat it? Is that progressive overload anymore? No.
That's when you have to reassess, or yeah.
So here's a nice little trick for anyone who's still listening to my rant. You should start with some left in the tank and build to a max week where you think that's going to be a max load or a max reps or that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you waive it and you do it again.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's not sustainable trying to max out every week. And psychologically, if you don't beat what you did last week, it's going to hamper your progress.
Yeah. And if you keep, the sort of blowback of that, if you keep hammering yourself at the heaviest weight you can, and like you might even see yourself regressing, like getting weaker.
And that's our next point.
Okay.
But that's perfect, right? We can segue straight into it. So, not applying overload correctly in a progressive manner will lead to lack of recovery.
Increased fatigue over time until you finally just...
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, it says recovery, but often people lump recovery and adaptation together. And I think that's very important to take note of.
Separation?
No, I think they should be, well, I mean, you could separate them, but understand that recovery is allowing for adaptation.
Oh, it's necessary for that. Definitely, okay. Like we each have to look at last week's podcast on sleep and how most of your muscle, like if you don't sleep, you don't build muscle. Like, that's it.
Or you actually lose muscle, right?
And so you sleep as part of your recovery process, and so
most definitely.
Yeah. So one of your principles for training is not just like push yourself as hard as you can in the gym all the time. Make sure you're also matching that with recovery.
Yeah. So we've talked about specificity, we've talked about overload, progression, and the recovery is going to be very specific to particular movements, and it's going to be particular to particular muscles, and the individualization is going to be part of that. So if we can give some basic examples, let's go back to the back squat and not talk about me. Let's talk about what normally the recovery period would be for a back squat. How many days?
But even that has some sort of specificity.
Okay.
Because you were doing, was it Smolov, or what was it, squatting every single day?
I've done the Bulgarian method, which is squatting every day. And then I've done Smolov program, which was 4 times a week. So squat's probably a bad example.
Well, not necessarily, but it's also like how much of you were you doing, and how acclimatized to it are you? Like I've noticed that I can squat 3 days a week, and so starter strength. 5x5 stuff.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, so 3 days a week squatting sounds like a lot to start with. We only do 5 sets of 5 reps. I never had any issues with DOMs or recovery or anything, and I progressively got stronger. And a lot of people that I started on, or when I have in the past been just do this for a bit, then they all see progress, and I've never heard any of them hurting themselves or falling to bits from 3 squatting sessions a week.
Cool. So frequency is not the only part of that equation, which is kind of what we've established there. I mean, you could squat 6 times a week, but you couldn't do like a heavy leg day 6 times a
Yeah,
week.
you wouldn't go squats, then leg press, then hack squat, then leg extension, and then squat the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah, because your overall fatigue would just be...
Most definitely, and that was an excellent point. So in these cases, right, it's looking at total volume or the total amount of overload that you've applied on each day and the recovery that you require for that particular amount of volume.
Yeah.
So squats, typically, we're looking at 2 to 4 times per week, right? And 3 is probably a really good one for beginners, just like you said. And
Absolutely.
just varying the rep ranges on each day would be fine. That's called weekly or daily undulation.
Yeah.
Periodization. DUP.
DUP, yeah.
Yeah. And you can do that for most major muscle groups. 3 times a week would probably be top end.
And that's something I've really learned in the last few years of my training and stuff like that, is the old bro split of like beating your chest to death on a Monday is less effective than being able to bench press 3 days a week.
Yeah, but then it's also individualized, right?
Yeah.
So if we're looking at those bro splits, they come from, I don't know where they come from, but they come from some bodybuilder who was like 140 kilos of pure muscle, and they needed the whole week to recover from their sessions because they had so much tissue. But we're like little puny humans to them.
Regular natural ones.
Yeah.
Yes.
So for us, the amount of weight or the amount of overload we're applying only requires a few days most of the time. There are exceptions, of course, like how long does it take you to recover from a heavy deadlift session? Actually, you're actually pretty good, hey.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't done deadlifts enough and like periodized enough to know what my limit with that is. Obviously, I've had lots of back issues through my life, so I don't deadlift frequently.
But typically, once people get to a certain level with deadlifts, it's probably going to be once a week.
Once intensity gets higher, right?
Yeah,
it's like once your relative intensity. It's like people that, if someone that's got a longer training age, that has been deadlifting for 10 years, can obviously lift far heavier, hopefully by that point, and also push themselves past like an intensity barrier that a lot of people would give up on. And so
it's probably related to just the pure intensity and how close you are to your ceiling in any particular movement, right?
Yeah, maybe how close you can get to. Like Dorian Yates training until he tears his tricep off the bone. A freshie in the gym couldn't do that if their life depended on it.
They couldn't even do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So of course he needs like a week to recover from that, because that's just ridiculous.
That's mind blowing.
Yeah. Whereas someone training as hard as they think they can on triceps, they might be sore for a day or two, but it's nowhere near the relative intensity of like Dorian.
And if we just take a step into like the frequency for us mere mortals, right? For arms and smaller muscle groups, shoulders, the frequency can be even higher because the relative loads are lower. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like I might be able to bicep curl 12 kilos in each arm. Yeah, I've got weak biceps and what? But that I should be able to do more than 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But if I could hit strict curl 100 kilos, maybe
not. Yeah, because
the recovery would be longer.
Yeah. Also, it's like your body's ability to, I guess, recruit the muscle. Like the shoulders are a good example, because like lateral raises being a terribly inefficient, like with dumbbells at least, being a terribly inefficient exercise, you never really can push your shoulders to the point where you wake up the next day and you're like, ooh, that's pretty sore. Whereas your chest, you're like, yeah, you'll touch it and it's sore. Shoulders, it's like once a year I get shoulder domes that are that good. They're like, ooh, that's sore.
You really pumped it.
Yeah, and so instead you just have to hit shoulders more frequently through the week, because you're only probably hitting them to like 60-70% of their capacity.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
So should we summarize the first 4 before we go delve into the study?
Yeah.
Cool. So all-encompassing specificity would be looking at the actual movements that you want to train, or the muscles that you want to train in the particular way that you want to get a stimulation.
Yep.
Then the overload is doing more than last time. The Greg Doucette.
In some form, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, train harder than last time.
You're going to progress that over a period of time where you're accumulating more volume or more intensity over a period of time.
Yep.
And then through that progression, you need to allow a certain amount of time for you to recover. And that's going to change depending on your training age and also what movements you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the quality of your recovery. So also like, so what you were saying about progressing, having some in the tank at the start of your program. So say your program's like 4 weeks long or something like that. At the start, you only work to like 70% capacity, then like 80, then 90, then 100% capacity. By that last week, you're going to start to feel that intensity a lot more. So your recovery is going to be more important.
And you'll want the week off.
And you'll want to, you'll want to deload or something like that. That's why you got to start a new block and start a bit lower usually. Yeah, and that's very important, especially for more trained individuals when they're pushing the envelope to that max.
Yeah, and it's super fun, like building towards like the end of a block and seeing what you're gonna get out of it. It actually makes training more fun. Anyway, so training right is more fun.
Yeah. Plus you see the progress a lot better if you apply the principles better, which is always more rewarding. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about not training.
Reversibility.
Reversibility. I'll just quickly describe what it is.
Yep.
And most people will understand this. If you don't use it, you'll lose it. That's it.
That's reversibility. Yep. Okay.
Now, I had this big qualm with this when I was at university because they would skim over reversibility. They would tell us that, oh yes, this is a training principle. And then they never supply this with any scientific literature or anything. Like, they were just like, yeah, like,
this
obviously, yeah. Obviously, if you don't train, you're going to lose it. And then it's like, well, how long does it take for you to lose it?
Yeah.
That's what was like always in the back of my head. And we stumbled upon...
you stumbled upon.
Yeah, I stumbled upon...
searched hard for it.
Yeah, a study from 2005, which looked at older men, right, who hadn't trained. I don't know if we have the study, we just might have to pull from memory, hey?
Well, you used to keep talking about it, I'll pull it up.
Yeah, so 2005, there were 3 groups, they all did resistance training. I don't believe that they had resistance trained in the past, or they hadn't done for a long time. There was a high intensity group, a lower intensity group, and a control. So the way they did it is they all the groups trained 3 times a week, and two groups trained 3 times a week, and the low intensity group worked at between 50 and 55% of their 1RM. The high intensity group worked at
80 to 85?
Was it 80 to 85? Yeah, it was high intensity. Yeah, 80 to 85% of their 1RM. And what they did was they trained them for 12 weeks, and then after that point, they stopped them training and to see how long they would hold their particular scores. So they tested 1RMs for particular things, and I think that's what we'll focus on.
The chest press and the leg press.
Yeah, we can just talk about those two, hey?
Yeah, because those are the most significant sort of changes, right?
Yeah.
And so they trained for 12 weeks. They got all the adaptation they could out of those 12 weeks in the 2 different training modalities.
It was quite clear that they applied progressive overload because for the first half they had less sets, and they actually added sets as the weeks went on, and that's quite a nice way to add volume.
Yeah. All right, so do you want to read out these?
Yeah, so leg press improved by what, 15%? Oh, 15 kilos rather?
15
no,
kilos.
Way more than that.
That's what, 23 for the low intensity group,
23,
and
35.
35?
Yep.
For the high intensity group?
Right, and then from that point, this is the interesting thing. Over the next 12 months, the low intensity group regressed below their starting strength, and the high intensity group was still higher than their base strength.
By like a decent amount too, by a good 13 kilos heavier still.
Yeah, so your leg pressing, just imagine this, your leg pressing, you do a 12-week program, you get way stronger, and then you don't train for a whole year, and you're still stronger than when you started that program.
Or you part of the low intensity group and you end up weaker after 12 months, which is what they found in the study. So they did their 12, and this is like a good example of this is someone that joins the gym. It's New Year's resolution time. They join the gym for 12 weeks. That's all they get, 3 months. They don't push themselves hard. They don't apply the principles. they see a little bit of progress, and then we see them next year, and they're weaker than when we saw them that year.
At the end of their program.
Yeah.
Oh, at the start of their program.
At the start of their program. So when they started up there on the leg press, they're doing 50. When they come back the next year, they're doing 45.
Yeah.
And that just hurts to see more than anything. But then you get the guy that's joined for 12 weeks, and he's like, okay, and he pushes himself. And then even the next year, if he quits for 12 months, comes back, he's still stronger thanks to that little 12-week snippet he did. So that's just a complete argument for intensity and actually working hard in the gym.
Yeah, it's backing up Greg.
Backing up Greg. Training hard.
Yeah, training hard. Who would have thought that?
Yeah.
Anyway, there are probably some limitations to this study, so maybe we can address them. These are older people, right?
Yep. So maybe when you say older, how old do you think? How old are we talking?
Well, older adult typically means over 65. Right? What was the average age?
70.
The average age was 70, yeah.
Yeah, average age was 70, 71.
Cool. So they're all over 65 though. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that means that possibly their regression might be quicker than a typical, like someone who's younger.
Yeah.
That's one thing. So the applicability of this detraining is really only specific to this particular group. However, the principles of the regression are pretty profound, and our physiology isn't that much different. We're just probably better at holding on to our gains than someone who's older.
Maybe like potentially higher testosterone levels and whatnot, or
it's going to be
newer
hormones,
tissue, a lot of stuff.
All sorts of hormones. The whole metabolism is better. Your ability to repair is better.
Yeah.
And also, it'll be interesting for us to see, because this was only done on men, what the recovery or the detraining effect would be for women. Do they hold on to it better than men or whatever?
Yeah,
that'd be something interesting for them to explore. Maybe I'll delve into it and see if we can find some.
What I find interesting is people having like a genetic preset strength level. Like, like some people can walk into a gym after never being in the gym and they're still relatively fairly strong.
Yeah.
And then someone else could never be in the gym and they walk in and they've got nothing.
That's probably lifestyle things, right?
Lifestyle things?
Yeah, so let's say you worked on a farm, right? And you pick up and you move things.
Yeah, or if you got a physical job, yeah.
Yeah.
But do you think there's like a genetic, because isn't there a sort of a pre-wired genetic amount of muscle mass that a person will have due to how they're sort of put together? Or
most definitely. Okay, so now we step into the last one, which is perfect.
We want to talk about.
The last training principle is individualisation. So everyone's response is going to be different based off their age, which is kind of what we're talking about. And now Adam is asking about preset muscle, right?
Yeah.
Or
so
preset
your
strength.
Your genetics when it comes to, like, like some people have very small frames and like don't have a lot of muscle mass, even like as kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or some people.
There's going to be predetermined things like hormone levels and actually the amount of tissue that you're born with. I mean, have you looked at the Belgian blue?
No.
The Belgian blue ball?
Wait, we've talked about this one. It doesn't stop producing
Yeah, myostatin. So that was actually slightly wrong, and you guys can scold me for that later. But these Belgian blues are built with more fibers. That was so the myostatin inhibition, I think, is in the womb.
Yeah.
So
they
actually
doesn't stop producing fibers in the womb.
In the womb. So when they come out, they have double muscle. And then their potential for muscle growth is bigger.
Yeah.
So there's likely a case for this in humans as well, where you might have more muscle fibers than the next person. We wouldn't know unless we started counting them, and no one wants to do those studies. Also, hormones are going to dictate how much growth we get, largely going
from your stimulus, like how much you get the genetic masterpieces that just have to pick up a dumbbell and they start responding really well.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And the guys that have to fight for it.
Yeah, most definitely. And then, of course, food, and then other lifestyle factors that are going to affect all of those hormonal shifts and responses to training. Now, in terms of strength, it gets a little bit more complicated than that, because of course hypertrophy does contribute to strength, but let's just talk about leverage, just as one example.
Yeah.
Okay, but there's obviously others. If my forearm is shorter, right, bicep curl is going to be easier.
Yeah.
Right, just because of leverage. I don't actually have to move the barbell, or the fulcrum from here, or the axis of rotation, is closer to the load lifted.
Yeah.
Makes
so
sense?
the moment arm is shorter as well.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
Yeah.
So if you've got shorter arms, you're going to be able to bench more with
Small
less
levers.
muscle.
That's like the squat and deadlift specialists. Sort of things.
Yeah, if you've got super short femurs, your squat is going to look amazing.
Yeah.
Like, assuming the rest of your body is in relative proportion. So the weightlifter Lu Xiaojun, have you seen him?
Yep.
His femurs are like, I don't know, tiny.
Tiny.
Like 10 cms long, right? Like, no, I mean, there's obviously an exaggeration, but relative to the rest of his body, that means that he's super upright when he squats.
And so he's just built for it.
He's built for it. Now, that also helps him with the pull off the floor as well, because of his positioning, and he can use his quads
He can get a
more.
lot more upright, use his quads more, definitely.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Anyway, and there's other weightlifters which we could talk about, but leverage is a big part, and that is genetically determined. So individually, certain movements are going to be a lot easier for some people and a lot harder for other people.
You can't train your femurs shorter or longer or anything like that. No.
Yeah, no, you can't really do that. There's some weird surgeries where you can actually lengthen them, but
Really?
Yeah.
Wild, okay.
Yeah. But yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, so individualization applies to every principle and how you'll respond to everything as well, which is why it's not just a blanket statement, do this and you'll get results, or do this and it's the right thing for you.
And something to consider is individuals will recover differently as well. So you might be really good at recovering from things, specific things.
Yeah.
Like, I'm pretty good at recovering from squats.
Yep.
Like, I don't know why.
You just thought maybe it's the amount you've done, or you in general could be just you're built to squat.
Yeah,
something like that.
Maybe something like that. And then I don't know.
I get ODL DOMs for like 3 or 4 days at a time.
Yes.
And it crushes me. So it's like
Yeah, yet you can leg press like with eccentrics, and then like 3 or 4 days later you can go
fine.
again.
Yeah. So individualization, even when it comes to recovery. Same thing, like the amount of sleep you might need to fully recover. It's
recovery is a hard one because it's like there's so many factors that could contribute to it.
And it's all trial and error. Like, it has to be like, I'm experimenting with this and I felt really good this time, so I guess this works for me. Yeah. Which is why taking objective measures and measuring things and tracking progression and what you're doing is super important for if you want to get better at anything.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, especially in the realm of health and fitness.
Cool. That's us, right?
Yeah, so that's training principles applied. I hope everyone got something out of that they could take away and sort of hopefully start sort of mastering their own training.
Yeah, and just try and keep them in mind when you're training. If something's going a little bit wrong, it's like, well, if you've got one of these principles out, if you're not like thinking about them cognitively, like you're not aware of them, it might be a good idea to like say, oh, that might be the reason why your training's not going as well as you want.
Yeah.
And probably the biggest one is like not recovering well enough and not applying overload properly.
Yeah, that's massive.
Yeah.
They all have their role that you have to keep in mind. Yeah.
Cool.
So, thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions about training principles and how to apply them, or anything you want us to elaborate more on, please let us know. Send us a message on Instagram. You can find us on Instagram at 2dudes1barbell. There'll be a link in the description. And we'll see you guys next time.